In this episode of Weekly Poker Hand, Nik Airball is put into the vice. He goes into the tank on the river for 23 minutes in this wild hand. Now, of course, I would never, ever, ever waste your time by making you watch Nik Airball tank for 23 minutes. But this hand is insane, and I wanted to share it with you. Let's get right to the action.
Approaching 6K in the live chat.
That was a really funny hand where he thought he had the flush. Here we go. Airball 4 deuce of hearts. Gonna open up the pot. Brown ball are gonna call here on the button. Tesla on the cutoff 9-8. And Stache is gonna make a move here with 4-3 of clubs in the big blind. 2,500 to go.
Right. Got him.
And a couple of folds, and we're taking a three-way flop here.
Playing very deep stacked, about $200,000 deep at the lodge at 5,100, 200. Nik Airball raises it up in the hijack seat with the 4-2 of hearts. He feels like gambling today. He's gonna get his money's worth in this hand. He makes it $500. Tesla in the cutoff calls with 9-8 offsuit. Brown Bala calls with a king 9 offsuit on the button. I would recommend not calling the big card, medium card, offsuit hands, even in position, even against people who are playing the 4-2 and the 9-8. This is a spot where you're going to be very dominated and your equity realization is going to be very poor. That said, Brown Bala gets in there, he battles, he calls with a king 9. Stache in the big blind has other ideas though, not 500 only. He makes it $2,500, which is actually a relatively small 3-bet given the stacks are effectively $200,000 deep, maybe a bit more for some of the players. Nik Airball loves to gamble. He sees the 4-2 of hearts as premium enough to see the flop. Tesla calls well with the 9-8 offsuit. Brown Bala lets it go with the king 9, which is definitely the right play now, even though he somehow, some way, had the best hand pre-flop by a mile. Let's go to the flop.
King 7-5, 2 spades. Not a board that anyone really connects with. They have a gutter for Stache, they have a gutter for Tesla.
The flop comes king of spades, 7 of spades, 5 of hearts. Stache, with his bad end of the gut shot, just checks, which is the best decision. This is certainly an annoying spot to have some sort of a draw, but have to just check and probably fold to a bet. But when there's a flush draw and better straight draws available all over the place, you just need to get out of the way, because even if you do make a straight, you could easily not have the best hand. Notice in this scenario, if the 6 comes, it's actually a disaster for him. He checks. Nik Airball with the 4 high decides to check as well, and then Tesla with the marginal gut shot checks too. So far, so good. Besides pre-flop. Let's head to the turn.
Some backdoor stuff for Airball. Checks through. Ooh, 6 on the turn.
In this scenario, if the 6 comes, it's actually a disaster for him.
Stache turns a straight, but Tesla's got him drawing stone dead here with the nuts. Airball also open-ender with a flush draw. This pot's heating up.
The turn is the absolutely disastrous for Stache, 6 of hearts. He bets 5,000. Nik Airball with the low straight draw with the 4 and with the low flush draw decides to make it 16,500. I think this is reasonable. I mean, look, you have to realize when you're playing very, very deep stacked, as these players are, you can apply a lot of pressure to your opponents. And if you can get them to fold everything besides sets and better, if you raise the turn and then blast the river, that's actually a really good play, because you're going to get your opponents to fold a huge portion of their range. Now, you do have to be a little bit careful in multi-way pots, because instead of betting into one range that will have, I don't know, 15 or 20% really, really good hands, maybe fewer, you're betting into 2 ranges that will have something like that. So you have to be a little bit more careful. Your bluffs are going to fail way more often. That said, Nik Airball loves to get in there and battle. Straight flush draw seems like a good hand to battle with. He makes it 16-5. Let's see how Tesla, with the stone cold nuts, proceeds.
What a turn card, 6 of hearts. The one card that could spark all of this action is here.
5K from Stache. 16.5 from Airball.
No, it's enough. It's enough.
It's a legal bet.
16.
Oh, sorry, 5. I didn't see the 5. I just tuned in.
Much more? No, it's good.
You're good.
Tesla announced Taste the Rainbow.
Tesla says, taste the rainbow. That means 1 of each chip. We have a $25,000 chip, a $5,000 chip, a $1,000 chip, a $500 chip, a $100 chip, and a $25 chip. No $5 and $1 chips in this game. He makes it 31,625 with the nuts. This is a spot where I think because the board contains so many draws, and it's highly likely one of your two opponents has either a flush draw or a straight draw or a set or two pair, I think this is a spot where you want to go bigger. I get the idea that you want to keep your opponents in, but you don't really want to keep them in if they're getting the right price to stick around. And when you make them taste the rainbow and essentially put in a minimum raise or slightly bigger than a minimum raise, they should call with all of those hands. Besides maybe two pair, and even then, like sometimes two pair is going to call and then only put money in when they get there on the river. So I think this is a spot where you want to go bigger, maybe something like 45,000, maybe something like 60,000 even, if you think, I'm getting stuck in my opponent's heads. If you know that your opponents think that you are willing to make overbets, as the commentators allude to during this upcoming 23-minute tank. So if your opponents think you can get in there and blast it with all sorts of stuff beyond just the nuts, I love making it bigger. That way you can make it something like 60,000 on the turn and then potentially even all in on the river and completely stack your opponents. Whereas if you go tiny here and get called, you're going to have a tough time going for a 2.5x pot river overshove. So I think a slightly bigger raise would have been better. Let's see how the two opponents proceed.
31,625. I believe that's one chip of every denomination.
Call.
And Stache makes the call with the straight here. Very interesting pot developing. What does Airball do now? Has the flush draw. That's an open ender.
Quickly makes the call.
Stache opts to call with the 4-3, and Nik Airball calls with the 4-2 of hearts. Let's talk about the 4-3 first. This may seem like a really, really good hand. Straight. And it is. The problem, though, is that I think he's going to realize his equity very, very poorly. If he shoves all in over this 31,000 raise, which I don't think would be too insane for only 163,000, what's going to call? Well, 9-8, obviously. 8-4 if Tesla has it, and Tesla gets in there and battles, he could have the 8-4 suited for sure. And probably the other 4-3s that Tesla could also have. Would he call with a set? Maybe. Would he call with a two pair? Probably not. Would he call a really high equity draw? Maybe, maybe not. For that reason, I don't actually think jamming is horrible, because you do get a lot of protection. But at the same time, when you're dead, you're just dead. And kind of like I talked about how Nik Airball has to be careful bluffing into two people, Stache has to be careful getting it in with a very strong but non-nut hand against two people, especially when it goes bet and raise and re-raise, even if the two players are insane. So he has a bunch of bad options. I think I would have called with the idea that I'm not folding on a safe river. The problem, though, is that if you call, Nik Airball is going to call with all of his draws, and obviously Tesla could have either the nuts or draws, and they're drawing all super duper live, right? So I think Stache's play probably just has to be to put in the 31,000 and then fold if the river comes off nasty and someone bets, and to call it off if the river is a safe river. Pretty bad spot for him, though. I certainly don't envy his situation. Nik Airball getting amazing odds with the flush draw and the bad gut shots. I think this is actually very close to a fold. The only thing he has going for him is that there's also a spade draw, so perhaps one of his opponents has spades and they don't have a better heart draw. If there was no spade draw on this board, though, I think the 4-2 of hearts probably wants to fold, even getting really good odds, because when you make a flush, you're not going to be able to fold on the river, and you're going to be against bigger flush draws some decent portion of the time. So definitely a tough spot for Nik Airball, too. Let's go to the river.
3 ways to the river.
This pot's ballooned to over $100,000. We don't even know what the river is yet. Offsuit 3, Tesla with the stone nuts, and both of his opponents have a straight. Once again, Tesla has maneuvered his way into a profitable situation, and he's going to bet $125,000.
He's been overbetting all evening. And he's had it the majority of the time.
1 if by land, 2 if by sea, and 4 if by Tesla.
I like it.
Stache here. I mean, what can you do here? It's hard to imagine you can do anything other than just call. You have a straight. You only lose to 9-8 or 8-4. What if Tesla's bluffing? What if Tesla has a set?
The river is a disaster for Stache and Airball because they both make the straight. They very wisely check around to Tesla, and then Tesla goes 125,000 into the 103,000 pot. Notice though, if you bet bigger on the turn, let's say 60 instead of the rainbow, 31,000, and both players called, the pot would have been about 90,000 bigger, so about 200,000 total. Tesla then would have had about 1.2x pot, which could very easily be shoved on the river. And when you have the nuts on the river, you want to be able to make as big of a bet as possible while still being able to get some action. And especially when all the draws miss, this is a spot where you can go very, very big, because while the straight did come in, I don't think anyone's ever folding a 4. And for all I know, if one player folds, the other may even call it off with a set, just thinking Tesla has lots of busted flush draws. So Tesla goes 125, which is good, but I definitely would have wanted the pot to be bigger in his shoes. Let's see what Stache does with the bad end of the straight.
This is a big decision here, Skull. This is 125,000.
Still have to worry a little bit with Airball behind you, but he makes the call.
And this pot has ballooned over 350. And Airball hasn't even decided what to do yet. He has a straight as well.
He's up out of his seat. Tesla up out of his seat.
We're going to get the signature Tesla pose here, I imagine.
Stache still seated. Where's Tesla going?
I'm going to need at least a few minutes. That's fine. Just at least a few minutes, maybe 5 or 10. I can talk, right? Because I'm not going to raise. It's not, doesn't influence the action, right? Okay, so
I think so.
I'm pretty sure I have you beat. I think you have like a set of kings or something, which is no good, obviously, when I'm in the tank. 50,
I don't know. Behind closed doors.
70, 80, 90,
A classic.
We are behind closed doors.
100,000.
We are behind closed doors.
That's it, you call. You covered the bet, right? 125, yeah. Wow. The other red 3, they all die. They do. They all die. It's the other red 3. Everyone dies.
Tesla going to be up heaps after this hand.
Like, what if you guys both have sets? Oh my god. Now I'm like talking myself into calling.
Stache is probably feeling sick, gives it a lot of thought, and decides to call. And I certainly do not fault him for calling in this situation because, like I said, both players could easily have draws. Maybe Tesla even had a 4 that decided to raise as a bluff, like 4-2 of hearts, and then decided to go for value on the river, which I think is very reasonable. So this is a spot where I think Stache is just going to lose a bunch of money. Obviously is once he calls. Now, I hope the editors speed through this. Nik Airball is going to tank forever. 23 minutes. They actually are required to call the clock on him in this scenario because they're playing a streamed game that has something like a 30-minute delay, and if you run into that delay, you would be able to potentially, not saying Nik Airball would do this, but you'd be able to potentially get information from someone watching the stream, hey, you need to fold. Imagine you have your fancy Apple Watch on and you get a text, fold, fold, fold. Well, then obviously you would fold. So, in this game, they must call the clock on people. While they speed through this, what I want to know is how long do you think Nik Airball should have to make his decision in this situation? 30 seconds, like in a tournament? 2 minutes? 5 minutes? Or an unlimited amount of time? Let me know in the comment section down below before we find out if Nik Airball feels the pain.
Okay, so would you ever just call here with 9-8 to trap me in? No, right?
0 by chance?
You just want to be all in.
It's a nightmare here.
What have you had before? There's just so much disaster in this hand. It's just, this is a train wreck, sorry. God, the other red 3. Just snap you guys.
I get this is a huge pot. It's a weird scenario. Nik Airball actually does have a very legitimate decision because he recognizes very fully he's calling for a chop or a loss in this spot. I do think there is a real chance Nik Airball does get half the pot in this situation. And for all I know, maybe in some world he actually wins whenever Tesla is bluffing and Stache has a set. So it is a tough spot with the 4. I think something like 5 minutes is plenty of time, especially if a player normally takes a decent amount of time. If you're a player who takes almost no time ever, though, then I think you should be allotted even more than 5 minutes in a situation like this. Maybe this is not necessarily great logic. You can let me know what you think in the comments section below. Go down there, click the like and subscribe button. If someone normally plays very quickly, like I do, Jonathan Little plays very, very quickly, and he finds himself in this scenario playing for a huge amount of money, do you think he should be allowed or given more time than people who take 3 minutes every time they get to the river? I personally think they should. Other people don't. That said, 5 minutes is plenty. You don't need 23. Let's see what Nik Airball finally does.
There's Doug.
Nice hat, Doug.
Check back. Check the flop. Check the turn.
So we're getting dangerously close to being caught up to live. So I'm not trying to
Sorry.
pressure. I just, at some point, the entire world will know what everyone has in this hand. So we got to make a decision here in the next like 2-ish minutes.
Sure.
Okay.
Your hand's going to be dead in 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2,
Fold.
1.
He makes the fold. Tesla is going to show the nuts.
Stache sees
Sorry,
the
that
bad
took way too long.
news.
$353,000 pot goes to Tesla.
Airball decides that no decision is the best decision. He times out, folds, and somehow, someway, saves $125,000 with a straight on the river. What a miracle.